My name is Ingrid Severson, she, her, hers, joining from Oakland, California, project manager for the Pacific Southwest MHTTC. Incredibly honored to welcome you all to today's session. This is session 2, developmentally responsive motivational interviewing for school-based providers, having strategic conversations about change with young people and their caregivers.
So this training today, as we said, will be a couple hours, and I really enjoy doing these trainings. I do lots of trainings throughout the week. And on any given week, I see people in private practice. I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm actually in San Francisco, and I teach. I'm a faculty member at the Wright Institute in Berkeley, California, and I'm lecturing faculty at San Francisco State. And all the different things I do, I really enjoy. I especially really enjoy teaching motivational interviewing. And how do you motivate little kids? And I have people asking me that, like, how do you use motivational interviewing with the 4-year-olds? And it's like, well, you don't really use it with the 4-year-old. You use it with their parent maybe, but not with the 4-year-old. But I have some information here from Harvard Center of the Developing Child, which is a great resource. And I'll talk a little bit about motivation from some of the research they've collected. And then we'll talk a bit about just motivation in general, motivational interviewing, and ways to adapt or think about MI with young people. Thinking about people who are like 10 years old up into adolescence and young adulthood. And I'll also talk about ways of building kind of resiliency and strength. So part of our developmental piece here was how to appropriately adapt MI to be developmentally useful for young people, right? Because motivational interviewing is used for adults as well, of course. And also to think about how to help promote developmental assets among young people. In this case, we're really thinking about strengths and resiliency factors. Really engage young people using a motivational interviewing that's appropriate for them, as well as how to start to build their strength, their confidence, their self-efficacy. All right, so a couple of things then, just our objectives here. We talk about, at least coming up with at least one intervention appropriate for adolescents, young adults, and parents. Of course, there'll be probably much more than that you'll come up with. We'll talk about values-based interventions and working with values. We'll also talk a bit about reducing resistance and ways to support autonomy amongst young people. And also if there's ways of thinking about guiding change conversations among family members. So I'm going to start today talking about little people, like younger kids, like kids who are not terribly verbal, like when small kids, usually about, I'll say 2 to 5 or 6, right? Kids that aren't as verbal as a little bit older youth and children, and how to build motivation amongst little ones. Because again, this is a conversation that I have with people who would like me to do motivational interviewing, but it's not really, doesn't really fit the model exactly. And so you'll notice on the screen, I have the stages based on Piaget, like developmental stages. Many of you will recognize this from probably a number of developmental psychology classes that you had as a undergrad or as a graduate student. And, when kids are younger, of course, we know this. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. Children are often using their senses more, or sensing more, and understanding the world through their experiences. And then as we get older, there's more logical, concrete understanding of the world. Then we can abstract more as adolescents. Now, this is a linear model. We also know this is a model of potentially understanding the world, and that it's culturally limited in many, many ways. Piaget did his studies on westernized people, westernized youth, and youth a lot of times that had gone to school, like Western schools, and learned in those particular contexts. So Piaget doesn't apply to everyone at all. Certainly internationally, Piaget doesn't apply. And so a lot of places, Piaget is not even being taught. But I wanted to put this up here as a way of just, kind of introducing this idea of just the developmental strides, developmental kind of progress, if you will. And I think we can safely say that, regardless of culture, there's definitely changes in the brain. We know this for a fact in terms of how the brain starts to certainly expand and specialize over development, how importance of experience in terms of developing and becoming more of a precise, responsive machine, if you will. We also know the importance of protecting children, from trauma. Really, the importance of building relational health. So this idea of trying to reduce adverse experiences while trying to build relational health are incredibly important for overall wellness. So to this, we're going to kind of think about how does potentially motivation start to fit into this model. It's a little bit about motivation because I get this question a lot. So, this idea of like motivation comes from a set of neurochemical networks that develop over time as a result of experiences we have. So an important thing to ask ourselves if we're working with younger people, especially like really little people, but I think actually, youth of all ages, how are we promoting safe exploration? And this idea of like how do we help sustain motivation and really curiosity, and the idea is like how do we really build internal drivers that are really responding to various feedback, and how do we provide the external feedback that really builds this interest and curiosity in a context of safety. So it's not all carrots and sticks. So how can we engage young people in creative problem solving? Maybe we do that together. Playful learning, like really trying to engage young people in the types of learning projects that are the most enticing for them. So many of you who are doing curriculum design and working in that space, a bit about this. Other things that we know about motivation is that addictions can divert motivation systems, and they require more than willpower to overcome. Right? There's a lot of very strong intentionality and support and mindfulness that needs to occur in order for folks to break kind of an addictive process, so to speak, or a repetitive, like compulsive type process. And small children aren't necessarily themselves involved in an addictive process, but certainly that can happen with youth fairly young. And there's a lot of things that get kind of put into that basket now, in addition to substances. There's a lot of things that we're concerned about in terms of process. And there's a lot of questions that are still being asked and kind of resolved around things like screens, especially, right? And the power they might have over, I should say, young developing minds. So motivation is complicated and it has lots of influences. Experiences and conditions shape mindset that goal achievement is possible. So, it's really important that there's some expectation, but also there's some learning and support for young people as they start going to school and start learning about how to be in the world, that they start to understand that you can set a goal and you can achieve a goal. They don't have to be huge, and they can certainly be flexible, but that this is possible. And that this needs resources, times, and skills and supports to achieve goals, which is why it's important to have things in place, and why it's important to have schools that are well funded, for instance, to have enough staff and resources. It doesn't mean you have to be a totally wealthy school district for this to happen, but it's just like how are we using the resources that we have, and providing a predictable reward is not enough to sustain motivation over time. So many of you know about this. Like if we reward every time someone does something, the certain experience starts to lose its novelty, and sometimes we even have adults be concerned, kind of rightly so, about is it, am I setting up like a bribe situation? Like I have a young person only doing something because they're going to get a reward. But what we have found is variable reinforcement is really important. That we get rewarded, we provide rewards, but they're not always predictable. And so if we provide like new activities, new rewards, different locations, we kind of mix things up, then things become more stimulating, more curiosity based, and it's more of a surprise when a reward does happen. And think about gambling, like the practice of gambling, like going, say, like even to, like I say, a casino. Like part of what's exciting about that for some people, and what motivates folks to continue to participate in that activity, is I might get a reward, but I don't always get a reward. And I won't know how much of a reward I'll get or when I'll get it. And that idea of novelty and expectation is enticing for us, and it's really enticing for young people. So these are some things to think about, and I'm thinking about this again for little kids as we're thinking about developing reward systems for them. But this can certainly be relevant all throughout the lifespan, or certainly all throughout grade school. I mean, I'm thinking there can be rewards and setups and fresh experiences and creative learning for high schoolers as well as for preschoolers. So when can we start to build motivation? Well, we can do that in infancy. I mean, it can happen like right away. And so what we're trying to do is provide some sense of interest and curiosity and really start to feed that. So it's this idea they call it the Goldilocks effect, which is providing novel stimuli that's interesting to babies, that's not too familiar, but also we can't put stuff out there that's too complex, that confuses them, but stuff that's just right. So what we're trying to do as providers, parents, etc., is start to notice, like, what do infants and small children, what do they pay attention to and engage with? And we want to continue to reinforce and kind of keep dropping things in there and be very attentive in a very process oriented way to, like, where's their curiosity, what do they respond to, maybe, and to kind of switch it up and to keep experimenting and adding new things that provide the reward of more curiosity and stimulus. There's also, that idea of, proximal development, right? Like, I can learn things and understand something that just has a little bit more challenge than maybe I have right now, but it's not so challenging that I'm overwhelmed. And all of you are involved in some aspect of education. That's an important piece of education as well, that we're not providing things that are too difficult for people to learn. How do we elicit curiosity? So this might be a great conversation to have with parents and caregivers. Again, I'm talking about babies here, but I think this is true for all kids, really. But thinking about, how do I, for the young person I have, kind of elicit more curiosity, helping them try out things. And I know this can be challenging right now too, because we have, so much that's like screen based, and there's more kind of, I have to say, certainly concern, but also interest in understanding, like, how do screens start to impact the young mind, like, very early. There is some concern about, how it might shift the ways that young kids think. So screens, certainly mixing it up with other things, and the things that we traditionally do, like, moving or throwing objects, not, painful objects, obviously, but like balls and things and cushies and things that children can interact with, and noticing, like, what they're trying to learn about the object and helping them get that sense of, like, what will happen next, and just maybe even asking them, like, what do you think will happen now, what do you think is going to be, the next step, and where's this going to go, trying to, of course, using the language that they'll understand, because we want to always be encouraging their curiosity. If a kid spills something on the floor, or if they see something that seems like out of sorts in the environment, like, for them to stop and look at it and point, like, really encouraging that kind of curiosity about what happened here. What do you think will happen next? Again, we can't always do that, and certainly there's times when we just need to clean up something and go, right? But just being able to stop and be curious is a great way for building that kind of motivation through curiosity. Um, Children of all ages engage in play, and play is intrinsically motivating. This is an important piece, of course, for parents to know. So again, if we're thinking about, how do I motivate my child, or motivational interviewing, I'm interested in that because there's something that my child could change, or I'd like to have them, move in a particular direction. In the spirit of motivational interviewing, like, we can't really control, like, an outcome or where somebody wants to go. Of course, we're going to be more directive with small children because we're taking care of them. But one of the best ways to really help, youth get involved in change is to really promote various aspects of play, watching how they're engaging, give them more of a chance to engage with others, seeing how, social bonds increase, social ability, et cetera. These are all things that, of course, as school counselors. But again, as you're working with parents and caregivers who are concerned about motivation, or, how is my child learning? I want them to kind of be engaged in a certain way. These might be just like helpful little, things to focus on in all of your toolkit. Other things like social interaction during learning. Young children can learn from screens, but how can we actually also make it more social potentially? So it's not just screens. And helping parents find ways to interact with their kids, even when they're very, very busy and challenging, just enough, as I said before, and getting a chance to level up with the next challenge as they develop skills. Also, if there's a way that we can give children choice and agency, this is also very consistent with motivational interviewing. One of the things we know about adults and young people in terms of motivational interviewing, what we've learned is how important it is to support autonomy and to give choice. Those are two really important concepts in motivational interviewing, because we can have all kinds of great ideas. We can see as helpers like what is probably the next best step. But even if I know I want to be effective, it's more important to be effective than it is to be right. So it's an important concept here, because I could be right that it would be best for this young person to do this, but I want to be effective. And if they're not ready for it, or it's not exactly what they want to do right now, how do I help encourage them to make the choices they're going to make, try it out and learn from it? Because that's where we see this overall kind of engagement, figuring things out, doing things for themselves, as opposed to maybe pushing back against a suggestion if they start to feel over controlled by me. And again, there's obviously a limitation to this. There's times as adults that we have to be more directive for safety as well. Other things that we know from some of these science-based approaches for kids, trying to find things that are naturally motivating, that if we have rewards and incentives, that can be fine, but try to really make them minimal and to do it only when necessary, because again, we don't want them to lose their effectiveness. And it's really trying to harness the child's natural curiosity. So I know in some families, as an example, and I know there's family composition differences around this, cultural differences that might impact some of this. But I know in some families where there's been some effectiveness around, we think about family chores or contributing to the family. Again, that's not necessarily for really small kids, but as kids get a little older, they can do little things before they start taking on full chores, for instance. Noticing the kinds of things that little kids like to do. So I've done this, and it can be a total mess, right? But it's still kind of building motivation, like having a little kid who's like really interested in sweeping, or really interested in some aspect of taking care of plants or whatever it might be. And of course, if depending on their age, it may not be totally perfectly well done, but it's this idea of like they have a natural curiosity. How do we start to harness that, so we can gradually really start to grow and build that, so as they're building more responsibility and chores and goal directed activities, we can start to maybe go down the path of not just least resistance, but a path that's paved by things that they care about. Just gives a really great way to sum this up. And this is so helpful because this is so true about any effective therapeutic intervention as it is for motivating kids, which is process rather than outcome. Right? When we think about the outcome, like we praise an outcome, we're encouraging a performance-based approach. Great job, you cleaned your room. And we'll talk about praise versus affirmation a little bit later on. But what happens then is like there isn't necessarily any kind of sense of like what it took to get to that place of cleaning the room, or at some point maybe having a clean room in and of itself isn't even necessarily that motivating or interesting or important to the young person. But if I can notice along the way places where they're working at trying to organize things, or they're figuring out like how they want their room to be, or various aspects along the way of them cleaning and organizing and tidying, that in of itself might be more effective than just great job, this entire thing has been done. Another thing that can happen sometimes if we just give rewards, children might start to want rewards and perform for rewards. But then sometimes what can happen is if there's more challenge and it's like, I get a reward when I get something done, I might not want to take risks, because what if I take a risk and I fail? And I see this a lot with adults, actually, who as kids were given lots and lots of praise for outcomes and lots of praise for perfectionism and being, and really achieving. They're really high achievers and it's great. But then they become adults and they find themselves like really stuck because there's a job they want to go for, but they are so afraid of what if I don't do a perfect interview? I want to go back to school, but what if I don't do perfectly on the admission exams? They become really dysregulated. So the idea of the process approach is like everything's learning all the time, and that's great. And so we reward people for um, the interest and the curiosity. Doesn't mean we give like large rewards, but we give rewards in terms of our interest and our support. So this idea is we're trying to create a growth mindset and a willingness. I love this idea of like the fail approach, which I got from a colleague of mine. And so anytime I have someone, a child or adult, anyone I'm working with, not have some sort of sense of like not succeeding at something they were trying, in order to build motivation, what I do is I talk about it as a fail. And I say, but it's not what you think. It's not like you're a failure. A fail in my world is first attempt at learning. So everything that we do where it doesn't quite hit the mark, it's like it's all grist for the mill. It's all valuable. Let's stop and look at what we learned from this and what can we do instead. So this works great with kids, but I do this like with adults who are in recovery programs. Maybe they have recurrence and they start to use a substance again. Well, I go back and say, hey, what did you learn up until that point? What did you learn about staying abstinent, if that was their goal? What did you learn about that? What worked? Where were you challenged? Great. Let's take this into our minds and just our little, amazing computer brains. And I mean that in a flexible way, and think about how we can take all we've learned and do something different next time or respond differently. It's all an opportunity. And it's a nice way of being able to think about this because it reduces that sense of shame and frustration. So I wanted to stop there and just be able to spend a couple of minutes, not a lot of time, but a couple of minutes just talking about these ideas of what are the science-based approach around motivation for the younger kids. And now we'll get into more of adolescents, young adults, maybe even kind of potentially latency age kids, like maybe like 10, 11, 12. That's a little more preteen. Like what kinds of things can we do that are more consistent with, say, a motivational interviewing approach when we have a young person who is more verbal? If I am doing like a general MI training, I usually spend 9 to 12 hours minimal to give a basic motivational interviewing training, kind of soup to nuts, of the theory and having people practice, etc. So there are definitely going to be some items here that I'm going to refer to that in a full-on training, I'd go into a lot more detail. So if you've had training before, hopefully this will, of course, connect with those ideas that you've had. If you haven't had it, just know these are some basic ideas that I'm touching upon, and there's definitely more you can read and learn about, and potentially go to more training for more detail. One thing I like to talk about, like early on, I think this is so critical, is what is motivational interviewing? So I have at the back of your slide deck, motivational interviewing, helping people change. That is the title of the kind of main text of motivational interviewing, published by Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick. And they first published, I think first edition of it, oh gosh, I think came out, I want to say probably in the 80s sometime. And the fourth edition, the most current updated edition of motivational interviewing, helping people change, is coming out in about a month. So I actually just got the electronic copy. So I think you might actually, if you go to Guilford Press, which is the publisher, you might be able to get it now. So the theory I'm talking about today is from this fourth edition, mostly. What I'd like to do is be able to link MI and be able to give you a sense of like what it is to other things that people are doing. So right now I'm talking with you all and you're part of like school teams. So I'm talking a lot about youth and schools, but earlier today I was working with a group of folks who are working in like general county behavioral health. And so they see people all on the life cycle and people with, sometimes really complex concerns. And we were talking specifically about working in crisis. So everything kind of shifts a little bit depending on who I'm talking to. But the basic idea of motivational interviewing, which is this idea of how to engage people in conversations about change and growth, remains the same regardless of kind of like who I'm working with, right? So that's a really important piece. And some of you may have seen this image before on the left. The image on your left here, the trans theoretical stages of change. And this is from work done by Carlo De Clemente and James Prochaska and John Norcross and others. And the idea with the stages of change is that regardless of your theoretical orientation, regardless of who you're working with, regardless of your population, regardless of your license or practice or whatever you're doing, that when we engage people in conversations and we're working in a helping profession and helping them change, that we are moving from a place of status quo. And so maybe if I'm thinking of a school team, maybe my status quo is I'm fighting in class. Maybe that's what's going on. And if I'm working as a helper, as a school professional, maybe we at some point negotiate a change target. And maybe that change target is to not fight in class or not to fight as much. So to move from the status quo, fighting, to not fighting, is a big step in change. And it doesn't just occur like a light switch off and on, that there's a process people go through typically. And that on the left-hand side, we see that process. Now, I talked about this before a couple of days ago. If you were here, I talked about this, but I can't assume that you all were here a couple of days ago. So just briefly, I will talk about the pre-contemplation, contemplation, and preparation. These first three stages, and it's kind of although it's a circular, we have it as kind of a linear model that we generally move from no change or low change toward change. We're thinking pre-contemplation is when I think like, I don't have an issue. I don't know what the problem is. There's nothing wrong with me fighting in class. I don't have a problem. Someone else has a problem. Maybe, it might be something like that. Contemplation is like true ambivalence, where it's like, I know this is probably not great, or, I wish sometimes I didn't fight so much. And I also am angry at times, and this is the best way for me to get out my anger. So it's both and, right? There's this ambivalence between, do I fight? Do I not fight? So I have awareness of a problem, but I'm not committed to changing at all. Preparation is when I recognize, you know what? I got to do something about my fighting. Like cognitively, I got it, but behaviorally, I haven't done anything yet. I'm preparing though. I'm open to ideas and coaching. So pre-contemplation, contemplation, and preparation, call this like pre-action, right? At this point, I'm either not there, or I'm ambivalent, or I'm getting prepared. And those first three stages perfectly match kind of the tasks of motivational interviewing. And so that's where we use MI. We use MI as an engagement strategy. It's the thing that we use when we have someone who, doesn't think they have a problem. The principal told me to come here. I don't think I have a problem, right? We use it when we have someone who's really ambivalent. I don't know. My parents say I shouldn't hang out with these people, but I like them. Or when someone's preparing, like, I really got to go back to class because I want to graduate, but I haven't done it yet. So this is where MI is perfect. When we get to action, when someone's actively modifying behavior, that is where we're really doing the work of active change. So that's where we might be coaching someone. It's where we might be using various approaches like a cognitive behavioral approach, or a some sort of like family intervention if we're doing family therapy, or we're helping, someone, with academic counseling, but in action, we're actively doing something that's working towards change. It's the work that school counselors are trained to do, right? It's like whatever your job is. And you can see there's a lot that could get in the way of you actually being able to do your job. By the time you actually get to action, that could take a lot of work just for someone to come in, settle down, sit in a seat long enough, be willing to talk with you. All of that is a lot of work, and that all of that is where MI thrives. And then we also have in here, just to let you know, the maintenance piece, that once someone is going to class, once someone is not fighting, once someone is maybe, expanding their peer group, let's say, how do we actually maintain the new behavior? Because that's part of the challenge too, isn't it? That we can have someone who wants to change, who maybe is changing, but just, I'm not doing it yet. So that's an important piece. And then the relapse, that's an older term. We don't usually use that too much. Talk about like recurrence, kind of going back, to older behaviors. And that happens all the time. So just think about the fail there, the FAIL. If someone goes back to an old behavior, how can we talk to them about what they're learning and help them reorient? Okay. And then we also talk about the spirit of MI. The spirit of MI is where, our values and around being humble and curious and open really come together. So when we're doing MI, I've talked about this already a little bit. We want to work in partnership, seek collaboration, and really find ways to empower the youth and caregivers that we work with so they're able to make their own choices, support their autonomy, give them choice. We accept them, and we don't judge what they're doing. And we try to show acceptance through the use of accurate empathy and reflective listening. We try to really affirm their strengths, and we try to reduce their suffering through having a compassionate approach. So I think we were doing a little bit of this earlier too, a couple of days ago, about thinking about times when you've changed maybe, and how somebody showed you some of this compassion, or worked in partnership, or accepted you for where you're at, or helped empower you. And this idea, the spirit of MI, when we come to this place of just being open, flexible, curious, process oriented, it's a game changer. Because one of the biggest problems we have working with youth, and for any of us, and it's really easy because we're trying to also help youth develop and grow. But where we get in our own way around this a lot of times is we try to get a bit, we don't intend it, but we get a bit over controlling. We have an agenda. We may not be outcome oriented, but maybe our bosses are, right? And so we have to sometimes manage up as well, so everyone can have a realistic expectation that when we have a young person, and if the only goal is like getting them to stop fighting without stopping, being curious with them, wondering about why they fight in the first place, accepting them for where they're at, figuring out, there must be a good reason this is going on. What kinds of things do you want? How do I help empower you around that? Like, that's the approach that is engaging and engages someone in having this conversation. If I try to get too controlling, that's when it's kind of like game over, right? As we know from young people. So if I'm engaging and helping a young person focus and start to discuss their challenges and their concerns from their point of view, what am I actually doing, right? And so this is where we talk a lot in motivational interviewing about our foundational skills, and we have these basic like 5 micro skills. Really, it's like 4 micro skills, the OARS, and kind of a process skill. That's the +1, which I'll explain in a minute. And these are all skills that every single one of you know, that you have all been trained in at some point in your careers. So what we're doing at MI is we're thinking about, how do we apply these skills strategically? So just so you have a sense of what they are, because I'm going to go back and talk about them today, and I'm going to especially focus on affirmation. And affirmation is a way of noticing. It's a way of noticing people's strengths and being able to reflect that back to them. So it's a positive reframe. It's being able to catch people being good, so to speak, and to be able to notice, to describe, to state back some quality that maybe they don't notice. We're trying to build their self-efficacy and their sense of strength. Reflections is active listening. It's when I mirror back what somebody's saying. I can mirror back in a very simple way, or I can mirror back in a way that really reflects back a bit more complexity by reflecting maybe what what they're meaning but aren't actually saying yet. And those more complex reflections really move along a conversation. They really add depth. We can ask open-ended questions, and open-ended questions are more powerful than closed questions, because closed questions we generally ask when we're trying to gather information. And there's times when we have to do that, right? For sure. But if we start to ask any question, open or closed, too much, people start to feel over queried, and they start to, all of us, we all do this, we all start to push back a little bit. It's too much questioning. Young people do this a lot. So open ended questions help us get more bang for our buck. If I ask a good, evocative, open question, especially one that elicits some change talk, some movement away from the status quo, that's giving me more than if I kind of squander my questions, asking questions because I just don't know what else to say. So being very intentional and strategic about when and how I ask a question. There's summaries, where I summarize themes and like summarize change talk. Summaries function to contain, to collect, to kind of pull together and to focus conversations, which is really nice because whether I have someone who's talking a lot about stuff or I have someone who's talking very little, a summary can kind of pull together all the different kind of pieces and make it more coherent so we can get a place of focus. Focus is helpful because focus gives us direction. And I talked about that a bit the other day too. And then finally, I know I talked about this a bit on Monday, the idea of providing information and advice with permission. So this to me is a distinct and very powerful motivational interviewing skill of seeking collaboration. Like, I have some thoughts to provide for you. Do you even want that? Do you even need that? Would that be helpful for you? And if it is, how do I give you maybe a menu of options that you can choose from? Being very thoughtful to not talk too much. And or if someone needs some information, maybe I give them a paragraph of information. Stop and check in to make sure that this is really useful before going on. So there's a back and forth about, would you like this? Here's a little bit. What do you think? Okay, would you, so we're gradually kind of feeding a little bit of what someone wants instead of just dumping lots of information. I've been talking about change talk, and I just want to say something else before we move on with some exercises and activities. Is change talk is a distinctive feature of motivational interviewing. Okay? And change talk, as I mentioned before, it's any talk, it's voiced by the client. It's not by us. It's not an intervention that we do. It's what they're doing. If they're moving away from the status quo and they're talking about a desire, ability, a reason, or need to change, that's what we often call preparatory change talk. And because we like little mnemonics, we call it DARN, motivational interviewing. So let's say in my example, of someone who's fighting in class, it might be, a desire might be, I really want to get along better with my classmates. Maybe they say something like that. Just like with a little kid, we want to reinforce what we want to see. We want to do that with a young person who's saying, I really want to get along better in class. We can do a reflection, we can do an affirmation, we can do an open-ended question as a way of being able to, tell me more. Or what I'm hearing you say is that you really want to be a good friend with some of your classmates, or I'm hearing here that it's really important to you to be able to get along and not to spend your afternoons in detention. I'm just kind of, just giving you some examples of ways that we might respond, because we want the conversation to be shaped. We want it to move more and more towards change talk. If there's an ability here, ability could be, I know I can get along with other people in my class if I really tried. A reason could be, if I don't get into as many fights, I won't have to spend the afternoon in detention, right? That could be a if then, that could be an example of a reason. And a need is often expressed as, I have to, I got to. I really got to start getting along with people because I want to be a good role model for my little brother. And so why is that preparatory change talk? It's preparatory because when people are talking the darn talk, they're not necessarily making any changes. So this happens early. This happens in maybe in pre-contemplation, but it happens a lot in contemplation, sometimes in preparation. And so we don't want to mistake that somebody doesn't want to change just because they're not doing something. The talk happens before the walk. So we talk about it before we do it, all of us. So that's a good thing just to recognize, even if someone's not doing what they said they're going to do. Maybe they're still fighting in class, but they're saying they don't want to. That's a great sign. I mean, we still hold them accountable for the fighting they're getting into, but it's like, hey, help me understand. You're saying you want to do this, and we can develop discrepancy. I know we're talking now about you being sent here to me because you got into a fight, and I'm also hearing you say that you really want to be a good role model for your little brother, right? We could make that discrepancy. I call it creating the itchy sweater. It's like it's not comfortable in the status quo right now because they're starting to change, and it happens in the head first. So if we can reflect that back, that's a helpful thing. And that we noticed in the research is that the more people talk the talk, the more likely they start to move into the mobilizing change talk. And mobilizing change talk is CAT, that's our acronym. It's commitment, activation, or taking steps. So commitment is like a willingness and attention. Like I will take a time out when I get heated up in class. Right? They're committing to doing something. Activation is more like I'll think about something. I'll try to use those relaxation tips that you gave me. Okay. That's a activation. I'll consider. And taking steps is if the goal is reducing my fighting in class, maybe taking steps is I talk to my teacher about taking a time out when I get heated up, right? So I haven't necessarily totally embraced the new behavior, but I'm figuring out ways to be successful, and I'm doing some micro steps on the way there. Okay, so and this is great because mobilizing change talk, if we have someone doing that and we're continuing to talk to them about it and building it, is very much connected to people actually changing. So the darn leads to the cat, and the cat often leads to action and bringing people in that stage of change into action. Okay, so I know we have a lot of lots of stuff here, so I'm going to maybe we'll take a break soon, but I'm going to maybe move into a couple of things we can get a little more action amongst ourselves here in terms of doing stuff in the chat box, because I know it's been a lot of lecture. So let me move into something that has you being able to talk with each other a little bit. So affirmations and identifying strengths. So I'm going to just spend a little bit today on that topic. Again, I can spin off into a lot of different types of things that we could focus on in MI, but I want to focus on affirmations and identifying strengths because it's really, really important in terms of increasing motivation for a youth and young adults. Because we typically see people because they're referred to us for a problem that needs to be treated, right? It's like a treatment. We don't always call it treatment in schools, but definitely there's this idea like there's a problem to be solved. And that's why we get into a problem solving or fix it kind of mode where we want to say, okay, we need to have this outcome. We need to get you back in the classroom. We need you to stop fighting. So we know in our minds, like, yes, there's definitely something problematic. How do I just kind of put that over here and just notice over here, but engage with the person in such a way of that they're able to identify for themselves, like where they would like to start around change and having change conversations. So maybe I'm someone who's fighting in class, but maybe I want to start talking about, I'm just kind of just making stuff up here, but maybe I'm a place where I want to just talk about how do I get out of or stay out of detention. Okay, let's go ahead and start there. Because of course, if we start to have that conversation, eventually we're probably going to get back to reducing fighting, right? That's because that's going to be a way to stay out of class. But I want you, young person, to choose the topic, to choose a direction. And so when we have this problem, in this case, it might be fighting, let's say, knowing the problem or even talking about fighting, it doesn't necessarily lead to solving the problem. Like, yeah, I can understand this young person might be aggressive in particular ways. There could be things going on that they've never learned how to use coping skills. Maybe there's a lot history of trauma that they're managing. All of these are important. All of these might be targets for treatment. But how do I actually help connect with this person in such a way that they feel they can do something about it? And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because one way to help engage people so they think they can do something about it is to really tap into their self-efficacy, to help build confidence, move away from shame and problem identification into strengths. So strengths doesn't mean like I validate behaviors that have consequence for others. I'm not going to say, oh, there's no problem that you're fighting in classroom, or I totally understand and keep doing it, right? I mean, obviously we wouldn't do that, but what it means is I'm trying to find that even in a situation where someone might really be struggling in that environment, what is their uniqueness? What kinds of things do they bring in to the space that I can really validate and affirm and help build up, so I can help them shift an identity from someone who has problems and is unregulated to someone who has strengths and has choice and can make different choices. So how do we do this? Well, providing affirmation, that's one of the ors, is a really helpful way to do this. Affirmations are a specific type of reflective statement which we describe, and we do not evaluate a strength or characteristic. So what I mean by that is I might say something like, I notice you're really supportive to your friends in class when they're going through a hard time. Okay, so that's me being able to describe for them, because I'm noticing, I'm hearing, I'm seeing something about them that is strong. In this case, their ability to support. Okay. An evaluation might be something like, "Oh, that's so good. You're so nice to your friends." Right. Right. So how does that feel different? You know, and part of that is the second place is about my opinion. And if a young person wants to reject that, it's easier to reject because it's like, well, you're just saying that. Whereas if I'm noticing, they can still not be into my saying it, but they're less likely to reject it because, hey, I'm just seeing what you're doing here. I'm not saying it's good or bad or I approve. It's about you and the environment and what you're doing. So affirmations are best used to describe behaviors, not values, attitudes, or goals. So I'm not going to necessarily, you know, you know, get into their like what they care about or their goals. I don't want to affirm or disaffirm any of that. That's kind of their choice. It's more about what are they doing in the environment? How are they behaving in such a way that's potentially helpful or positive or shows a particular strength. So the way I do it, I tend to structure it in a way where I'm thinking about what do I notice, see, or hear. Like how do I'm showing evidence of someone's ability so they can start to build an identity as an individual with strength and start to really gain access to that quality. And when we asked, like, what's an issue that you're dealing with? And one of you said, I have a truancy rate, which actually I'm assuming was a high truancy rate. I tried to directly write what somebody put here, a high truancy rate for a high performing student with emotional health challenges. So I'm assuming that maybe this is someone who has, say, like depression or anxiety. Could be something else, but let's just say we don't have that context. Let's just say that's what it is. And they do well in school, potentially, there's high performance there, but they don't show up, right? Because maybe they're really anxious about that. So being fully aware that you do not have context or history for the student, and so you can kind of make some up or add some in your mind. Um, what might be some possible like targets for treatment? And go ahead and put this in the chat box. Like, what kinds of things might you potentially focus on? And again, we're going to ask them what it is that they might want to focus on, but what do you think might come up? Yeah, what's getting in the way of going to school? Try access to transportation, huh? Trying to understand what challenges they face attending school, how we could support them. Okay. Yeah, so you're being really curious from their point of view, like what might be getting in the way, right? So those could all be targets for treatment. Now, again, you don't know like a lot about this person, but there's certainly things you can be curious about as places to start. Like, and Stacy has an interesting point here. What do they do when they're not at school? Family, personal relationships, those activities outside having to work to help support the family. Yeah, all these things could be going on. So what we're trying to do then, we work with this person, keeping all these things in mind, is trying to see like where are they willing to start, how any of these particular issues that you're mentioning in the chat box, how they might be a part of this particular dynamic. And again, we have this thing here, it's truancy rate for a high performing student with emotional health challenges. Would you consider using an affirmation for this person? Kind of given what the little that we know about them so far. And if you do, what do you think would be a potential quality that would be able to confirm? Yeah, so people are saying absolutely. Okay, excellent. So yes, exactly, Natalie. That's where we're going with this. That we have this issue. It's a kind of a both and thing. So we have on the one hand, there's truancy. We know there's a mental health issue, but we also know they're high performing. That despite all that they're going through, there's some performance. Yeah, you get really curious, as May is pointing out here, with like there, something's happening here that's allowing you to really participate. Something is probably really, really important to you. That's great. And so again, we don't know all this person's situations, but if you were to construct an affirmation, just to kind of making up some context for this person, because again, we don't have it. I see you want to get extra help with things you're struggling with, which is likely they are, right? Because they're talking to you. I see you work really hard at school. Yeah, even though they're not there, there's still something they're working at. I hear teachers are talking about the excellent quality of work you're turning in. They really miss you in class when you aren't there. Is thinking about this difference between affirmation and praise. Again, with this idea of affirmation, what we're doing is we're noticing, we are being aware of, describing that this sense of awareness of someone's characteristics, skills, abilities, achievements. That's about really building them up, but it's our noticing them. Whereas praise is more about me, and it's about my opinion of them. It's a positive opinion, to be sure, but it's not necessarily adding a lot of meaning to them about like what it is that they're skilled up about. It's more of my approval. That's a difference between a praise and affirmation. Recognizing kind of their own internal strengths, what they bring, again, their superpower or their abilities, as opposed to just maybe relying on me saying that's great, right? And we want them to be able to recognize, like, yeah, I'm someone who is a certain thing. Here's another exercise. Sometimes doing motivational interviewing, which you might find really useful to help people feel more competent, more strength based, more affirming. And again, developmentally, something we're really trying to do with everyone, of course, but with young people, trying to help them really become more empowered by starting to recognize like they have these abilities, they have these ways of being able to do things. And here's a little strength exploration and reflection. Some of you may have seen this exercise where it's common characteristics of successful changers. And with adults, I might actually say, hey, these are some common characteristics of successful changers. With a young person, I might decide to say something maybe a little bit different, depending on the developmental level of the person. Also thinking about these words. These are definitely words, I think, depending on where you're at. Some middle schoolers might get, hopefully most high schoolers will be able to recognize these words. You might want to rewrite some of this if you're working with younger people, or maybe if someone's reading level of English is not as at this level, you might want to consider that. But this idea is like, I might say something like, here are some ways people are, some traits or some abilities that people have that when they make changes or do something in their life where they feel good about themselves, like they're able to use some of these characteristics, some of these abilities, right? Again, I'm trying to think of different kinds of words or ways that you'd phrase that. And maybe one of the things to do is I'd like you to think about, circling any number of these. Maybe you circle a bunch of them. Maybe you only circle one. But just go ahead and read through and see if any of them really connect to you. And then what you can do is, when someone goes through, they start to circle, we can, stop and pause and, have a conversation. So maybe someone's doing something like, they go through and they circle powerful and they circle mature and maybe eager, it's like, okay, tell me about a time when you felt that you were powerful. What was it was in a situation where you felt that you had power? When was the time that you felt that maybe you were more mature than your years? So what it is it's a nice opportunity that, um, if I'm not actually seeing or noticing or it doesn't come up in conversation about their strengths. And so again, with our example of the high performing student who has emotional challenges, okay, okay, we talked a little bit about what might be a change target for them. How could you imagine using then something like this with the high performing student? How might you introduce this particular assignment to them? Again, thinking about the student we have who's maybe having some difficulties in terms of emotionally mental health challenges, but they're high performing in some ways. So what might be your way of, how could I use this exercise with that particular person? Initially meeting with them and brainstorming which goal to focus on and finding strengths that could be used toward that goal. Absolutely. That's certainly something that would get started, Jordan. Absolutely. And I might be thinking that as they have that goal, if there's maybe the goal was like, I want to go back to class, or I want to maybe not have my anxiety control my life so much. Maybe they're saying things like that. I have a question with them about when's a time when you've done well in both school and being able to get to school, or is a time when you felt particularly successful in the school environment? Did you notice like any of these particular qualities were happening for you at that time? Or maybe we can even ask in general, do any of these particular qualities really show up for you? If they do, how might they be helpful for you in managing your mental health challenge so you can go back to school? Yeah, so Raven's like having them relate these descriptors to their high performance at school and then figure out how to use them for attendance. Yeah, that's really nice. So again, we're trying to leverage strengths. This idea, like we know what the problem is, but what's the solution? Well, in many ways, the solution is a strength that they already have. So if I know the problem, that allows me to write a treatment plan potentially, or to, we don't always do that in schools, but to be able to say, like, this is why I'm seeing a young person. But what do I actually do about that problem? What do I actually do about not coming to school? Well, a good place to get started on a solution is to figure out what can you do right? What can you do? What are you doing that's actually already showing some real potential? So there's something they're doing, and maybe for their classwork, maybe they find themselves being skillful. They find themselves to be a really responsible person. Maybe they also are ambitious in some ways. Excellent. So how might we think about skillfulness and being ambitious, and all these pieces? How might we think about that in terms of getting to school or managing your mental health challenge? Whatever might really be the potential challenge. So the next exercise I have, or next piece of resource I have, is value sorting. So probably many of you have done value sorting before. I love value sorting. It allows us to anchor. And the way I'm stating it here is it's helping people orient toward their own North Stars, right? It's allowing people to have their own direction. So say I have this real high achieving student, but they're not coming to class, as an example. And maybe part of what's going on for them is I sit with them, they're like, yeah, I like school. Maybe I've been, I'm interested in some things. I'm good at it. But you know what? It's too overwhelming. I get too anxious. I'm too worried about failing. And why be there? It's like I'm not even sure why I'm showing up. So we get a lot of that with young people too, right? Like, why should I do anything that anybody asks? Why do I even care? And we have a lot of young people right now really struggling with depression and anxiety. We know there's more of that. Um, there's reasons for that. We know that the pandemic did not help people feel connected. We know there's a lot of concerns around climate anxiety, gun violence, things that are real in young people's lives, places where they have real concerns. So being able to link them up to values may really help answer that question about why. Why do I do any of this? It's an existential exercise, to be sure. I think this is a good exercise for adults, but for kids, I think it's important developmentally because we can miss that, and we can absolutely miss that. So just as a reminder here about kind of our process in terms of what we're doing in MI is when we first meet with someone, like we're trying to help engage them, listen to what themes are coming up, help them then find a place of focus. And then once we have that place of focus, we become more evocative around, tell me more about this. Tell me more about the place of focus is how you're going to get to class. Like, what about class is important or not important? And sometimes then in this evoking stage, like in order to really generate change talk, it helps to know somebody values because it could be like, well, I don't know. I don't know why I should go to class. But if we know a little bit about what someone cares about, then we can start to develop some discrepancy. And the discrepancy could be between like what one's doing or not doing, like not going to class, and achieving the value. So it can be like, how is not being in class, how is that moving you towards your value of maybe this person has a value of being independent. Well, how's, being in or out of school, how is that helping you be independent? How does that not help you be independent? How is your behavior moving you toward or away from something that you care about? That's a really important piece. How is doing what you're doing or not doing it moving you toward or away from your value? And so you might be thinking, well, how do I do this? Like, how do I generate values? So here are a whole number of values out there in the universe. These are just a few of them. And you can actually make values lists that they can then sort out themselves. I preparing today for this webinar, just kind of going through my phone, just looking at some pictures for some reason. And I had taken a picture of a value sorting that I just did a couple weeks ago with a high school student. And we had them all sorted out. And I was just thinking about how important that exercise has been in terms of providing direction for this young person. But many times it's really nice to have an area of focus, and you can do a number of different values lists. Like maybe for this example of the high performing student, maybe we do her values just around school, or maybe we talk about work and occupation. Could be relationships, it could be work, whatever area you want to explore. And then we have them sort into most important, important, and not important. And then I go back and I look at the most important. I have them focus on 3 to 5 values. And what we can do then is always think about these values in this particular area. And again, it's hard to narrow down. So it doesn't mean they can only have these values and that's all we ever talk about. But if we just spend some time just looking at values, maybe each week we can go back to some, or occasionally I go back to these values. And it always serves as our anchor point around like different decisions they make, different exercises we try, different goals that we have. Like, how is this helping you reach your particular value? And again, what you can do is you can decide like which area of life you want to focus on. So again, it could be anything. And for a lot of young people, it's things like school, relationships, family, and relationships might be friendships. It could be like intimate relationships, the types of things developmentally that young people are really thinking about. They're often thinking about intimate relationships and to some degree, like various aspects of identity, like what's important. And then what you can do here, and I won't do the whole thing for time, scroll down, and it just allows me to start to sort them. So it gives me a definition: expressive, conveying my thoughts and feelings, through what I say and do. So maybe I decided I want to do this around school. And for this person, maybe that's not important. Cooperative, willing to assist and work with others. Maybe that's important. So I hit the blue key. Helpful, giving help, And so as I do this open, oh, that's important. That's very important to me. So you can see it starts to sort them out for me, and maybe, I go and I do this and I have a number of people in the number of cards and the very important. And then we can move them around if we want to. We can do our top 5. And at the end, I can summarize it. I can also save my settings, so I can save a copy and go back to it, which is really helpful because, again, it allows us to anchor our work. It's a really important piece. And this exercise, helping anyone, but again, helping young people determine their values, is just so important, just developmentally. We don't necessarily take a lot of time in our work to do that. Just again, we're often very much focused on problem solving. So what does it mean to actually just spend time to go ahead and think about values and to think about what it is that we care about? Case example number 2, since we've already used one, but this person said, I'm a therapist for high school youth who frequently have substance use difficulties without insight into their issue. So what stage of changes are these people? Say people or person. What do you think? And if you have someone with a pre-action stage of change, what do you think about values? Like how might that be useful? And why might that be useful to even focus on values if someone doesn't think that they have a problem? And Maya, you are right. They are probably pre-contemplation. Yeah, and sometimes Jordan's right. Sometimes we can have somebody who's contemplating if they were ambivalent, because you can still think, oh, I don't really think I have a problem, but maybe I should check this out, feeling both ways about it. Definitely, if someone is coming in on their own, they're probably in contemplation, because if pre-contemplators don't come in on their own because they don't think they have a problem. So nice. So you got that question. So we have someone who's pre-action, pre-contemplation. Why could that be useful to work with values? Well, again, it gives them a sense of direction. It might be, a way of being able to think about, how does, this help you with your particular values? Yeah, Carolyn, you're absolutely right. Using values helps people assess to assess how their substance use aligns or doesn't align with their values. Exactly right. That's why we use this. It gives us a little bit of leverage. And otherwise a place where we'd be really, really stuck. So I have someone here, their values sorting exercise indicates that they value friendship, independence, genuineness, and reliability. And honestly, I just popped those thoughts off the top of my head. I wasn't thinking of anything in particular. So if you know these values, these 4 values that are really the top values for this person, what statement might you create in order to support these values in the context of substance use? So again, thinking about, here's somebody who's this person is using cannabis daily. They state they use it to manage their anxiety, but they also say they value friendship, independence, genuineness, and reliability. So thinking about all these things and that value and what they're doing, what kind of statement might you make toward them? I'm just going to again give you a chance to brainstorm this a little bit. That allows you to use their values while addressing this particular issue. Oh, great. These are great. Got lots of great stuff here. I'm wondering how your cannabis use either helps or hinders you from being a good, reliable friend. Yeah. Nice, Alexis. I'm curious how your substance use impacts your ability to be genuine in your interactions with others. Yeah, you can really care about this. And so let's think about how this is helpful. Then you can always sometimes ask straight up, what's the impact of using cannabis on your friendships? Like you really care about your friends. So that could be a good open-ended questions. And so this one, you value genuineness, but when you're high, you aren't necessarily yourself. Would you agree? That might be, it's great. I understand where you're going there, and I like that, but it might be, it could work, but just being aware that for some people, like would you agree, might feel too directive. So it might be something like, you value genuineness, and I'm curious if you're high, if you feel like you're really genuine. in your relationships? Like that could just be a wondering kind of question. Great. These are really good. Innocent friendships and independence are strong values for you. I'm wondering whether your friends use marijuana and how that impacts your friendships. Yeah, so we're being curious, we're exploring with them because again, we're trying to develop that discrepancy, that itchy sweater potentially between, what they care about and what they're doing. And again, we're really trying not to be over controlling. So potentially we could have a situation where maybe somebody is using cannabis and there isn't any impact on their values. Generally, if somebody is, in this case, they're using it to manage their anxiety, there probably are ways that they're using like enough of it, or they're using it in situations where it is impairing their ability to really be with people. So valuing genuineness and reliability, I wonder how, or maybe if these are masks when you use marijuana, right? So they may, they may say it isn't, so sometimes it's more about just being, continue to kind of open up the conversation. This is something that someone else brought up, and they said, uh, I am working with someone who's a foster youth that I believe is being guided to lie by their biological parents to damage the placement. Like maybe say something bad is happening in the placement, and so that's all I got. That's all the information I have. And so I'm wondering how might values work be useful for an individual challenge and maybe torn by loyalties to parents. And for the chat box, you have a young person who is finding ways to defend the biological parents at the expense of the placement. And we can fill in the blanks of whatever context that might be, but maybe they're saying that people aren't being kind to them, or they don't feel comfortable there. There's something wrong with the placement. Again, I'm not saying there's any evidence of this. Let's assume that there's no evidence of this, that it's more of this pressure that someone's feeling kind of torn. And that their value sorting exercise indicates that they value family, freedom, loyalty, and honesty. So knowing these values, what statements might you create to help them support their values, or that work inconsistent with their values? Yeah. Yeah, this one can be really, really tough. And again, I think with this also, we're thinking about context. And there might be a lot of time that we even spend before we even get to a values exercise of, just doing reflective listening and just noticing like it's really, really difficult being in foster care. This is it's a really challenging situation to be in a place where, you're away from the people that you love and care about. That's just painful. It's painful to be apart. Even, and wouldn't necessarily say this to the young person, but we know that even when a young person is separated from a family that might be abusive, there's still attachment, right? And there's still loyalties that come up with that. You mentioned you really value honesty. I'm curious if you're being honest with your case manager and your parents in this placement process. Yeah. Maybe even like, 'cause that was kind of questioning. So maybe I'd like that a lot. Though. So I'm thinking, this is great. This is like really advanced work y'all are doing here. You mentioned honesty. And I wonder how honesty shows up in your with your case manager and parents. Just to be curious about, it's all about curiosity. Might have to do the values exercise for themselves and then hypothesize what their family's values are. Talk about the differences. That's a really cool intervention. That could be a really cool intervention. And I'm thinking, Sarah, you're thinking about some aspect of certainly compare and contrast, but also helping them have that sense of individuation maybe, which could be helpful. Yeah, good. What about values of family and honesty may be at odds with each other here? Yeah, Raven, I think you're right. It's like I could imagine maybe saying something like this has to be such an incredible challenge because you're someone who really values honesty, and sometimes loyalty, but you also value, it's also there. Sometimes those two, are in conflict with each other. And I can imagine how that is really challenging for you. I can imagine that there's a lot of pain there. Just that kind of reflection sometimes, right? Just noticing the dilemma they're in and noticing how uncomfortable it makes them feel. That's great. It's great work. Yeah, this is good. These are like a kind of like really advanced, like little pieces that you're doing here. So before we finish, I just want to throw in a couple other things that are just so good. This is actually from Using MI with Youth and Young Adults by Sylvie Nar and Miriam Suarez. It's a really great book. There's so much good stuff in there, but I can't get to all of it. I can't get to all of it. But I will say a couple things since I only have, a few minutes left that I think are important. So if we're thinking of all the different components of MI, and again, today we were also thinking about how to build developmental assets and strengths in young people. So that is an important part of using MI with young people, is really supporting their development, catching them being good, being able to being good, so to speak, helping them feel competent and providing that self-efficacy that builds motivation. Other things that are really important too are like emphasizing autonomy. So through all this process, again, that idea of let me just park my agenda like right over here, and be really careful that I don't try to fix things or try to talk someone into a certain approach or point of view. And so I sometimes want to clarify my role of like, hey, I'm here just to help facilitate. I'm here not to force you to do anything. I'm not going to try to fix anything for you or to try to control your outcome. It's really up to you. And we're always seeking collaboration. Like if I give information or advice, there's always a piece of it. And this is up to you if this is something that you even want. Is there something else I'm missing? What else would you like? This idea of like, you're in situations and it may not be your fault. Like, for example, be in this foster care situation, nothing there happened that's your fault at all. But there's definitely choices you make, that there's personal responsibility that you have right now in terms of how you're managing yourself in placements, right? Which is both a gift and it's also a challenge at times. Emphasizing the values again, which is why it's always so helpful to generate them and do like a values clarification. Just love that. And sometimes we can help them go through like, if you do this or if you do that, what could be an outcome? So helping them understand consequences of actions, but really helping them start to determine that. When we do have places where there's choice, menu of options are always really great. I'm like, let's go down and think about all the different ways. And I'll just use our example here that you could talk about, your family relationships or all the different ways that you could show loyalty to your family, all the different ways you could be honest, and just kind of look down this list here, and you can have a choice. And that fits into the ask off or ask dynamic too, which is if I'm going to give information or advice, I first of all ask to make sure that's even wanted. And then if I'm going to give it, to ask permission to provide it. I offer like these menu of options. I offer maybe, just a bit of information, to kind of seed some ideas. And then I ask again to make sure, like, is this okay? Is this resonating with you? Maybe I don't use the word resonate. Is this helpful for you? Would you like something else? So we're always being so thoughtful about the boundaries, because anytime we try to be too controlling with a young person, they can really react to that understandably. Another thing we want to be able to do when we're working with young people and sometimes our caregivers is notice when we're getting into conflict or there's a little bit of pushback. The classic term for this is resistance, right? Like somehow somebody's being resistant. And this idea that we have in MI of resistance is we create resistance when we try to control an agenda. People aren't resistant. Any of us can resist things when we feel like our control is being taken away, when we're being pushed to do something that we're maybe not into doing. Any single one of us will become resistant. So if I'm working with a young person, if we're dancing, if it feels like we're ringing in sync and we're working together and things are moving along really nicely, great, keep going. But if it feels like I'm wrestling with somebody, I'm pulling teeth, I find myself wrestling, then I want to do the stop, drop, and roll. I also got this from Nara Suarez. It's such a great idea. Stop what I'm doing, drop whatever intervention I'm doing. If I'm trying to convince somebody, if I'm lecturing or warning, or just kind of running an agenda, put that aside, because that can sneak in even if we don't expect it, or if we don't think we're doing that. And just use active listening. Just use active reflective listening. Maybe I even say, I got a sense right now that maybe I'm off because I'm feeling that there's some tension here. We could reflect on the process. And we support autonomy and apply other empathic strategies. So again, I don't want to force your choice. It's really up to you what your next step is. I believe heavily in like reflective listening. There could be other empathic strategies. Could be like summarizing themes that are coming up in our conversation. It could be potentially using some of the affirmation that you did earlier. And again, kind of how to kind of roll with it. And these are some of the ideas of different ways of doing um, other empathic strategies. I just talked about that the empathy affirmation, trying to limit to 3 a session. If we over affirm, sometimes it can start to feel phony. Um, Occasionally, if I use apology, if I maybe really made a misstep, maybe I call somebody by the wrong name. Maybe I misgendered somebody. That happens. It's not something we like to have happen, but it can happen. Or someone could have a real concern about something, or they felt whatever direction I was going in felt offensive. I might apologize to that. Continue to emphasize autonomy, and if it's something they really don't want to focus on, maybe we can shift focus onto something else they're willing to talk about. There's also ways we can use amplified reflection, which is if someone's really stuck, we don't try to talk them out of their stuckness. We just amplify their stuckness in a way. So if someone says something like, "There's no way I'm going to go to a class with that teacher," I might say something like, um, you know, going to that class right now is something that is just completely off the agenda, and you're absolutely, not going to think about doing it. So I'm reflecting what they're saying, and maybe even just really kind of even going a step further about, in terms of like, this is just not going to happen. Because what we find is if someone is very much wanting to set a limit and say, no, I don't want to do this, very much into the status quo, they expect sometimes to be talked out of it or to have somebody try to engage them around that. So if I can just be like, hey, I get it, you definitely are not going to do this, then they're more likely to back off a bit. They're more likely to back off and be a little more open. Um, Sometimes there's things like we can, focus on the positives of changing as well. Like if there is some aspect of change that's coming up, we can think about, what are some of the benefits of that. While minimizing or not spending a lot of time on some of the areas that they they really don't want to deal with. Like, I'm not going to try to convince you to go and talk to this teacher that you absolutely are unhappy with. Clearly, we're going to probably have to find a solution for that class, but I'm not going to go head to head and try to get you involved in something that you just find really distressful. And then agreement with a twist, and maybe we agree to some aspect, but then we do a little bit of a reframe. Um, so maybe in this particular situation, it's like, yeah, I get the sense that sometimes you have to, really yell loudly to really feel, heard. And I'm also hearing you say that, you'd like to find some way, somewhere to be heard and to have your feelings count for something. So it's like, I agree with them. I get it. Like, makes sense of like, I understand the function of your behavior. And the twist might be, maybe there's something else we could think about in terms of how you might want to do this. How might you use some of the tools, or like what kind of response might you have to that if you're thinking of a stop, drop, and roll from this particular challenge, and that might help you move towards a more productive conversation. And the thing with stop, dropping, and rolling is like just knowing that, okay, I got what we call in this particular case discord, because in a way they have something going on with us. Like, I don't know what you're even talking about, right? It's a little bit of finger pointing to me, and um, they have some challenging in my role. So again, how do I stop, drop, and roll in that case if I'm like trying to bring up them taking responsibility about cutting class? What might be some things, given what we've talked about, that we might want to do? Okay, I understand what you're saying. Cutting class isn't a problem for you. And you have a great question. The question I might just that open-ended question there, I might pause for, because sometimes if we ask a question when someone is in Discord, um, it can continue to go down like a more negative path. Like that particular question, if we query people, asking questions sometimes makes people even more activated when they're resistant. But I love the first part, Sarah, of understand what you're saying. Cutting classes isn't a problem for you. Just it's doing kind of a more of an amplified reflection, or just kind of coming alongside, and we're going to stop there and just see what they're going to say, just so they feel heard, and that we're not going to keep trying to challenge them right now. This doesn't mean we're going to completely ignore their cutting class by any means. We're just trying to engage them to where they're willing to listen. It seems like you aren't sure why you're here. Like, that's actually a really great thing to reflect back to young people, right? If they really don't know, if they have a bit of a attitude, because maybe there is a place at some point about and you would like to know why you're here, and they might then want to have a conversation about that. And it could be, well, I'm being told that there's this class cutting, and I'm here to say that you don't think there is. They're like, what's going on there? Just being totally curious. And so, for this particular case, if you happen to know that reliability and education was part of their values, maybe there is some question there about how is reliability and reliability and education showing up for you now in this particular situation. Whatever you think's going on, whatever is behavioral issue that we'll be talking about, whatever reason you think that you're being sent here right now. Yeah, so Christina has a really good point about context, right? So if there's something about rapport, so sometimes if you know somebody, like, okay, maybe I just stop, I don't want to get into an argument with them, so it's like, okay, so you're not really sure why you're here, some of these things that you're doing to stop, drop, and roll. But sometimes, like, if you know them pretty well, there might be more of a situation of, like, hey, you could be more casual, or maybe I don't say casual, but just maybe more comfortable being maybe more directive with them. Because again, if you know someone, you might not, even if they come at you a little bit, with some attitude, a few empathic responses, they might calm down, like, kind of enough to be able just to get to the bottom of what the issue is. Yeah, so this idea of, we're not going to initially go into a lot of query. We're not going to start to challenge. We're going to just stop for a minute, just do some reflection in order for them to calm down again, so we can start to re-engage. So being aware of the time, I only have a few minutes left, and we have an evaluation here to do, is just these few pieces, and I hope you found this helpful. Motivation and conversations about change are different across the lifespan. For young children, we want to think about reinforcing what we want to see and other behavioral interventions. For adolescents and young adults, we focus on developing and supporting values, allowing for autonomy, seeking collaboration, managing discord between us and the client. And for best results, engage your curiosity, drop our control agenda. I'm not saying that's easy, and find ways to listen and support autonomy through exploration. Yeah. Sometimes we say in motivational interviewing, some of these concepts, they're simple, right? They're pretty easy to understand, but applying that isn't always easy. Right? It takes some real practice, and our own kind of self-regulation, and really focus on the process and building safety through establishing respectful relationships. This is a recipe for success, and as trust helps create emotional climate that supports change. So in our last example of, like, I don't want to go class, I don't even know what you're talking about. I think eventually we're going to get to a place where we're going to be talking about class, and we're going to be talking about going to class. But I know if I try to have that outcome immediately, and I just try to force that outcome, that I'll probably just be in a world of struggle with this young person. But if I just step back for a second and just get curious with, about the process, what do I need? What would be helpful to help this person engage? Just slow it down. I can tell maybe this has been a tough day. That, process and good process builds on more good process, and it just keeps building. And usually good process builds to a place of having some good outcome, or the outcome that we want to see. So this idea of being in process, noticing the places where we can change and pivot in order to continue to engage, is really an important piece for building this trust and ultimately engaging in a change agenda.
Huge thank you to Dr. Dempsey, and to our funder, SAMHSA, for making this possible. So thank you all, and take good care.